in the medium term, the biggest concern will be the risk of increased Iranian cyber attacks. They have quite good cyber ability, and terrorist attacks in the UK. We know from the governments what they've said publicly that about 20 terrorist plots in the United Kingdom linked to Iran have been foiled over the last 12 months. Well, if this turns out very badly for the Iranian regime, there'll be a lot of people motivated to take revenge on those who've attacked them, and that will include the United Kingdom. So I would say that the biggest threat is either the cyber or terrorist threat in the UK in the medium term.
But first, let's talk about what's been going on as we are at the moment at 10 past 10. This evening, the US military has confirmed 2 more service members have been killed in the conflict with Iran. That brings the total up to 6. The news came just moments after the Iranian military said they were closing the Strait of Hormuz, a key global oil route. And in the last hour, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been speaking in Washington to reporters.
The imminent threat was that we knew that if Iran was attacked, and we believed they would be attacked, that they would immediately come after us. And we were not going to sit there and absorb a blow before we responded, because the Department of War assessed that if we did that, if we waited for them to hit us first after they were attacked, and by someone else, Israel attacked them, they hit us first, and we waited for them to hit us, we would suffer more casualties and more deaths. We went proactively in a defensive way to prevent them from inflicting higher damage. Had we not done so, there would have been hearings on Capitol Hill about how we knew that this was going to happen, and we didn't act preemptively to prevent more casualties and more loss of life.
There's a lot of linguistic gymnastics going on there, isn't there? We acted preemptively, proactively, in a defensive way. Marco Rubio there, here in the UK, speaking in the House of Commons in a very different style, our Prime Minister, insisting his decision not to get involved in the offensive strikes on Iran was in Britain's national interest.
We were not involved in the initial strikes on Iran, and we will not join offensive action now. But in the face of Iran's barrage of missiles and drones, we will protect our people in the region and support the collective self-defence of our allies, because that is our duty to the British people. And
he also combated directly the very issue that his approach and the president's are rather different.
President Trump has expressed his disagreement with our decision not to get involved in the initial strikes. But it is my duty to judge what is in Britain's national interest. That is what I've done, and I stand by it.
Speaking of Trump, it was a remarkable press conference, they always are, aren't they, that he gave this afternoon. Just take a little bit more of him now. This is him insisting that the US will stay the course.
And we have, right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that. We'll do it. Whatever somebody said today, they said, oh, well, the president wants to do it really quickly. After that, he'll get bored. I don't get bored.
Let's speak now to the UK's former National Security Advisor, Sir Mark Lyall Grant. Good evening, Sir Mark.
Good evening, Olly.
There's a lot, isn't there, to get our heads around. I suppose what it comes down to, though, is whether confrontation between Israel and Iran was inevitable at some stage. So however you frame it, this is where we eventually would have got to, perhaps, anyway?
Possibly. I mean, there were negotiations going on between the United States and Iran on the nuclear dossier, sort of mediated by Oman. But Israel was never happy with that. They never liked the Iranian nuclear deal that was agreed by a number of countries, including the United States, back in 2015, which President Trump subsequently pulled out of during his first administration. And they weren't really happy with the idea that the Americans might reach a deal with Iran this time round as well. And I think it's very revealing what Marco Rubio has just said in that clip, where clearly this action has been driven by Israel, not by the United States. And I think if one looks at the situation now, sort of 48 hours or more on, it's a win-win situation for Israel. I would characterize as a sort of win-loss situation for the United States. They might get a good result out of this, but it's just as likely, perhaps more likely, it won't turn out well for the United States or for President Trump personally. It's obviously a lose-lose for the Iranian people, and it's a lose-lose for the Gulf states. So the only country that I think has really benefited from what's happened over the last 48 hours is Israel.
Long term, that makes sense because obviously any Israeli would say, yes, I'd rather not have that regime in Iran pledging death to our nation. But I suppose in the short term, it might not feel like a win when there's missiles raining through the air over Israel.
Well, Israel has very good defenses against missiles and drones. Yes, they have suffered some casualties, but I think they have much better defenses than, for instance, the Gulf states do, who rely on the United States and to some extent the United Kingdom and other Europeans to sort of protect them from this attack from Iran, which they'd never obviously expected. But I think why I say it's a win-win for Israel is that whatever the outcome is, whether that is some regime change to a sort of more democratic, Western facing Iranian government, perhaps not very likely, or it's a survival of the regime after the death of the supreme leader, or it's chaos and civil war in Iran, also possible. That's not a bad result for Israel because in the meantime, Iran's military capability, its navy, its missile capability, its nuclear capability, its drone capability will have been very seriously degraded over however long this conflict takes. So they would consider that, I think, and Netanyahu personally would consider that to be a big success.
Let's talk about how this is dealt with within Number 10, because you've been in the room where this happens. Can you describe the kind of conversations that'll be happening between the PM and his current National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell?
Well, the first conversation happened a few days ago when Keir Starmer decided that he would not allow British bases either in the UK or in Diego Garcia to be used by American long-range bombers to attack Iran. Now, that wasn't a straightforward decision because it was clear that President Trump would not be happy with that decision, and indeed wasn't happy with that decision. But it was taken really for two reasons. One is that the British government believed that that offensive action against Iran at that particular time when there were negotiations going on in Geneva would not be legal under international law. And secondly, they were very unclear, with good reason, incidentally, what the ultimate objectives of the US administration in launching such attack would be. Now, all that changed over the last 24 hours when Iran retaliated by attacking in a pretty indiscriminate and reckless way a number of Gulf countries, most of whom are allies of the United Kingdom, and indeed threatened UK servicemen in the region and indeed a sovereign base area in Cyprus. So in that changed circumstance, I think it was a relatively easy political decision for Keir Starmer to take to say, now we will allow the Americans to use these British bases in order to suppress the military missile capability and nuclear capability that Iran has in the name of collective defense of our allies in the region and indeed in defense of British interests. So I think the first decision was controversial and we know that Trump didn't like it. The second decision, in political and indeed legal terms was relatively straightforward, I think.
And in such a fast-moving situation, I mean, you've just vividly painted there how, the whole calculus can change within 24 hours. It's going to change again now, isn't it, with Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz, according to the country's Revolutionary Guards Force there anyway. They've said that the military will set any ship trying to pass on fire. I mean, what are the conversations that might be happening around that?
Well, they have attacked at least 3 ships, as we know, and they are effectively closing the Straits of Hormuz, although they are allowing, interestingly, some Chinese ships to go through. But I think there's about 150 odd ships waiting to cross through the Straits of Hormuz, which won't do so, not least because they can't get insurance in case they are attacked. So it is a sort of, if you like, without having nuclear weapons, this is the nuclear weapon that Iran does have, which is closing the Straits of Hormuz. What that does is does huge economic damage to the Gulf states and also will be deeply alarming to China. who receive a lot of their oil from the Middle East through the Straits of Hormuz. It doesn't affect the United States directly because the United States has self-sufficiency in oil and gas nowadays. It affects the United Kingdom very directly, but over a certain period of time, because we take quite a lot of liquefied natural gas from Qatar that can't now go through the Straits of Hormuz. And so that is a concern. The price has gone up, and that will have an effect on, the British economy if this conflict goes on for an extended period of time.
And you're a former national security advisor, as I was saying. What do you think is actually the biggest threat to our national security at the moment? So for people that are listening to this, who don't have relatives in Iran or in Israel, what is the impact that this could really make to British people listening now?
Well, we mustn't downplay the sort of risk to British military, civilian personnel, tourists passing through the airports in the Middle East, because I think, they are in a difficult position and the government's trying to launch a sort of a consular evacuation campaign to get as many people who want to return to the UK back to the UK. So that is perhaps the immediate concern. But I think in the medium term, the biggest concern will be the risk of increased Iranian cyber attacks. They have quite good cyber ability, and terrorist attacks in the UK. We know from the governments what they've said publicly that about 20 terrorist plots in the United Kingdom linked to Iran have been foiled over the last 12 months. Well, if this turns out very badly for the Iranian regime, there'll be a lot of people motivated to take revenge on those who've attacked them, and that will include the United Kingdom. So I would say that the biggest threat is either the cyber or terrorist threat in the UK in the medium term. Now, the government's fully aware of that, and I wouldn't want to alarm your listeners by saying that this is a hugely increased risk, but it is one that the government will be aware of and will be looking to mitigate.
All right, Sir Mark, thank you for that. Really good to have your expertise this evening. Sir Mark Lyall Grant there, former National Security Advisor.